There's a sacred rule in the process of manifesting our deepest desires, a rule so subtle, so quietly powerful, that most people live their entire lives without ever realizing it. It isn't locked in a monastery, nor buried in a sacred text. It is hidden in plain sight, woven into the very structure of our minds and the way we perceive reality. Today, I ask you not as a philosopher in an ivory tower, but as a fellow traveler on this winding road of life to pause and consider just one desire. Not your entire bucket list, not the collage of dreams taped to your fridge or pinned to a vision board. Just one. Choose the desire that lingers, the one that knocks on your thoughts late at night, the one you've nurtured with hope and prayer, yet still feels slipping through your fingers. Hold it now, gently, like a memory that matters. Here's the truth. Our minds do not simply reflect reality, they generate it. This isn't mysticism. This is neuroscience. The reticular activating system, RAS, a network of neurons located in the brainstem, functions like a filter. It prioritizes information based on what you consistently focus on. If you've ever bought a red car and suddenly started seeing red cars everywhere, that's your RAS at work. But the RAS doesn't just show you what already exists, it influences your behavior, your decisions, your perception of opportunities. It bridges the gap between what you desire and what you experience. Now, let me introduce you to a man who understood this before we had brain scans and academic journals to prove it. Neville Goddard, a 20th century mystic and lecturer, taught that imagination is not daydreaming, it is creation. He believed that what we assume to be true in the mind becomes true in the world, a notion now echoed in cognitive behavioral therapy and placebo research. The placebo effect alone, where patients heal because they believe they've been treated, has been measured in over 90% of clinical trials. Belief alters biology. Neville's most radical teaching was that you do not need to ask for your desire over and over. One clear assumption, if persisted in, is enough. This goes against the grain of our upbringing. We were taught to strive, to hustle, to earn every good thing. But what if the opposite were true? What if the act of clinging to the desire, of repeatedly begging or worrying, is exactly what keeps it at bay? Let's consider a metaphor grounded in the everyday. Imagine planting a seed. You place it in the soil, water it, and walk away. You don't dig it up every few hours to check if it's growing. That would kill it. Instead, you trust that the process, though invisible for a time, is unfolding. Your assumption that the seed will sprout allows nature to do its quiet, unseen work. Manifestation works the same way. You ask once. You believe it's done. Then you live as though it's already unfolding beneath the surface of your life. This principle is supported by the psychological concept of self-fulfilling prophecy. In multiple studies from the American Psychological Association, people who believed they were lucky or successful unconsciously made decisions aligned with that belief, which in turn produced the very outcomes they assumed. The brain is not simply an organ of thought. It is a prediction machine. When you assume a future state with emotional conviction, your brain begins to wire itself to expect it. And where expectation goes, attention follows. Where attention goes, reality bends. You might be wondering how to put this into practice. Here's a simple yet powerful structure you can begin using today. First, choose your desire, the one we talked about earlier. Next, picture the version of you who already has it. Not as a fantasy, but as a felt experience. What do you see? What do you hear? How does your body feel? This is not idle daydreaming. It's mental rehearsal, a technique used by Olympic athletes and high-performance professionals across the world. Studies from Harvard and Stanford have shown that imagining a task in vivid detail activates the same neural pathways as performing it. Your brain cannot fully distinguish between imagined success and actual experience. Once you've stepped into that imagined state, here's the hardest and most important part. Let it go. Release the grip. You don't need to obsess over it or check every day whether it's coming. If you've felt it deeply enough, if your nervous system has registered it as real, then your internal world is already changed. And when your inner world shifts, your external world follows. So, I invite you now to do what so many never allow themselves to do. Ask once. Believe it is done. Then stop asking. Stop pleading. Begin walking, speaking, and deciding as if it is already part of your life. Not because you're pretending, but because you're aligning with what you've already created in consciousness. This is not blind faith. It is faith informed by biology, psychology, and experience. And if you begin this process today not with desperation, but with calm clarity, you may just look back a few weeks from now and quietly smile, wondering how everything suddenly started working out in your favor. Let that be your beginning. Not tomorrow. Not after the next prayer. Right now. Close your eyes. Breathe. Assume the end. Then let it go. Imagine waking up one morning and deciding, without doubt or hesitation, that the life you've been waiting for is already yours. Not someday, not when the conditions are right, not after someone gives you permission, but now. This is the heart of the second great principle in the art of manifestation, the power of assumption. Neville Goddard called it the cornerstone of creation, and science is now slowly catching up to what he preached decades ago. At its core, this principle asks you to trade your longing for ownership, to shift from wanting to being, and to see your desire not as something outside of you but as something already embedded within the structure of your reality. It sounds bold, even counterintuitive, yet modern psychology and neuroscience reinforce this very idea. Let's begin with what the brain actually does when we assume something to be true. The prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for planning and decision-making, doesn't distinguish well between reality and vividly imagined experiences. Studies from the University of Colorado have shown that visualizing a specific outcome with strong emotional intensity triggers the same neural circuits as actually living that experience. For example, when participants imagined lifting weights, they increased strength by up to 13% over several weeks without ever touching a dumbbell. Your mind is not merely reflecting your external life. It is rehearsing and reinforcing what it believes to be true. This is why the assumption must be clear, consistent, and emotionally charged. When you assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled, as Neville taught, your subconscious begins to reprogram itself to support that version of you. And the subconscious, unlike the conscious mind, controls nearly 95% of our daily behavior. It regulates your posture, your tone of voice, your perception of risk and reward. It's the autopilot that quietly steers you toward what you believe you deserve. Now consider the elderly man who walks into a store with confidence, holding his head high, speaking with calm authority. People treat him differently than someone who shuffles in, eyes downcast, uncertain in voice. That shift doesn't begin with the world. It begins in the mind. The assumption of dignity leads to the experience of dignity. This is not just anecdotal. It's supported by research on embodied cognition. A study from Harvard showed that individuals who held confident body postures for just 2 minutes before a social interaction were more likely to be perceived as competent, respected, and persuasive. The body reflects the mind, and the world responds to the body. You become the message long before you speak it. So what does this mean for you, sitting here now with your one sacred desire in mind? It means that if you continue to think of it as something separate from you, something far away or not yet available, you are perpetually rehearsing the absence of it. Your brain, your body, and your actions follow suit. But if you dare to assume that it is already yours, if you let yourself feel the peace, the gratitude, the quiet satisfaction of having it now, you activate a completely different set of systems. Your behavior begins to align with opportunity instead of scarcity. You move through the world as a receiver rather than a seeker. And life, being the mirror that it is, reflects that back to you in people, moments, and outcomes that reinforce your assumption. The practical application is simple but powerful. Each morning, before you engage with the day, close your eyes and step into the feeling of the life you've already claimed. If your desire is health, feel the strength in your limbs and the clarity in your thoughts. If it's companionship, imagine the sound of shared laughter, the comfort of a familiar voice. If it's financial security, sense the lightness in your chest, the calm in your decisions. Do not wish for it. Assume it. Do not plead. Embody. Then move forward as if the world already knows who you are and what you have. Because in truth, it does. You are not creating from lack. You are revealing what has always been possible. Now, you may be asking, what if I don't feel it? What if doubt creeps in? Then the work is not to force the feeling but to return to it gently, like returning home after a long walk. The repetition is not a chant of desperation but a practice of remembrance. Like muscle memory, the more often you return to that state, the more natural it becomes. Neuroscientist Dr. Joe Dispenza calls this firing and wiring new neural patterns. Each time you assume your wish fulfilled, you are laying down a path in your brain that eventually becomes a highway. The old road of doubt and delay fades from disuse. So here's the action I ask of you. For the next 7 days, spend 3 minutes each morning assuming the end. Not visualizing loosely, but embodying specifically. Feel it, hear it, know it, then let it go and act as though the world has already caught up with what your mind now knows. This is not pretending. This is preparing. And if you do this with sincerity, you may find that what once felt impossible begins to arrive not by force, but by resonance. The mind assumes. The world responds. And so it is. There comes a moment in every journey when the most powerful act is not to strive harder, but to release. To let go not with despair, not with frustration, but with trust. After you've assumed your desire as already fulfilled, as already yours in the deepest chambers of your being, the next essential step is to relinquish the emotional grip you've kept around it. This is not surrender in the sense of giving up, but surrender as a higher form of wisdom. It is the same surrender you practice when you plant a seed and trust the soil to do what it's always done. You do not return every hour to see if the roots have cracked open. Somewhere deep inside, that life works best when you stop interfering with its timing. Science supports this subtle but profound act. In the field of psychoneuroimmunology, studies have shown that chronic stress, the constant mental tension of worrying, checking, doubting suppresses the immune system and clouds decision-making. A 2019 study from Carnegie Mellon University found that individuals under long-term stress had significantly reduced ability to identify and respond to new opportunities. In contrast, those who practiced mindful letting go showed greater emotional resilience and mental clarity. When we clutch our desires too tightly, we signal to the brain that the outcome is uncertain, even dangerous. This activates the amygdala, the brain's fear center, and we begin to operate from survival rather than creation. Letting go shifts us back into the parasympathetic nervous system, where healing, openness, and alignment flourish. In simpler terms, when you relax your grasp, your body and mind become fertile ground for good things to arrive. Philosophically, this echoes the ancient teachings of the Tao Te Ching, which encourages action through non-action and wisdom through effortless flow. The river does not strain to reach the sea. It follows its path with certainty, even through detours and storms. In the same way, letting go is not passive. It is participation in the quiet rhythm of trust. I once spoke with a woman named Ruth, a retired schoolteacher from Illinois, who had been praying for reconciliation with her estranged son for years. She lit candles, repeated affirmations, carried photos in her purse. But nothing changed. Then one afternoon, while tending to her garden, she whispered out loud, "I don't need this to happen anymore. I'm okay either way. I've loved him as best I can." That week, her son called for the first time in 7 years. Was it coincidence? Or was it the softening of her energy, the surrender of her emotional grip, that made space for life to respond? You see, when we release the need to control how or when our desire arrives, we begin to embody a calm expectancy instead of a desperate chase. The science of quantum cognition offers insight here. It suggests that our beliefs and mental states shape probabilities around us. When we fixate too much on a particular outcome, we actually narrow the field of potential events. But when we relax, we open to possibilities we hadn't imagined. You've seen this in your own life. The job offer that came when you weren't looking. The healing that began when you stopped obsessing over symptoms. The friend who reached out when you finally stopped replaying old hurts. These are not accidents. They are reflections of alignment. So how do you let go practically, without slipping back into doubt? Begin by noticing the physical sensations of attachment. Is your jaw tight? Are your shoulders hunched? Take a breath and release them. Then speak softly to your subconscious. It's done. I no longer ask. This is not magic. It is mental training. Neuroscientist Dr. Andrew Huberman of Stanford University has demonstrated that conscious self-talk, when paired with breathwork, can regulate the nervous system and reinforce new cognitive patterns. Each time you affirm completion, your brain lays down a new track. Eventually, it becomes the default. Another method is redirection. When you feel the urge to revisit the desire, choose an act of faith instead. Go for a walk, write a thank you note, plant a flower, donate to a cause. These actions may seem unrelated, but they signal trust in the unfolding. And the universe, or, if you prefer, the divine intelligence that breathes through every leaf and every lung, responds to trust in kind. Finally, give yourself permission to forget. Not to deny what you desire, but to stop defining yourself by its absence. When your desire no longer feels like a missing piece, it often arrives like an old friend turning the corner. So I invite you today to hold your dream with gentleness, not with clenched fists. Assume it fully, feel it deeply, and then when the moment comes, let it go like a paper lantern rising into the night sky. Watch how your world shifts when you stop chasing and start welcoming. Watch how life, no longer resisted, rushes in to meet you halfway. Letting go is not the end of the process. It is the beginning of its manifestation. And your only task now is to trust what you've already claimed. Once you've assumed your desire and let it go with quiet confidence, the next step is both deceptively simple and radically transformative. You must begin to live from the state of the wish fulfilled, not toward it. This distinction may sound subtle, but it is everything. To live from the state means you carry yourself as if what you desired is already present in your life, as if the future has folded into the now. You no longer wait for permission to feel peace, joy, or fulfillment. You bring those feelings to the present moment like you would bring warmth to a cold room. This is not pretense. This is participation. And science gives us compelling evidence for why this shift is not only philosophical but neurological. Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett, a neuroscientist and professor of psychology at Northeastern University, has shown through years of research that emotions are not fixed reactions. They are predictions. Your brain constructs emotional states based on the story you are telling yourself. If you tell yourself you are still waiting for happiness, your brain will generate the emotion of longing. But if you live from a place of "it is already mine," your brain begins to predict stability, safety, and satisfaction, and your emotional landscape shifts to match. In this way, your internal state becomes a compass, directing your thoughts, decisions, and actions toward alignment with the assumed reality. Consider the man who believes he is healthy and strong even while recovering from illness. He eats with awareness, moves with purpose, and speaks as someone whose body supports him. Over time, his habits reflect this belief, and so do his results. This is not self-delusion. It is self-direction. When Olympic athletes mentally rehearse their victories, they don't imagine themselves striving for the finish line. They picture the moment after it is crossed. Their muscles respond, their hearts adjust, and their confidence rises not because it has happened, but because their nervous systems believe it already has. That same power lives in you. You do not need a gold medal to begin walking like a champion in your own life. You only need to remember who you are in the version of reality where your desire is fulfilled. And from that memory, act. The philosopher William James once said that to change your life, you must act as if what you do makes a difference. It does. Every step you take from the assumed state reinforces the structure of that reality in your brain. You wire yourself to receive what you once thought was distant. If your desire is companionship, begin setting the table for two. If it is financial peace, start managing your money with calm clarity, as someone who already trusts their abundance. If it is creative success, speak about your work with the quiet pride of someone who knows its value. You're not faking. You are forecasting. Now, you may wonder, isn't this just positive thinking dressed in new language? But this is not about repeating mantras or ignoring real challenges. It is about recalibrating your inner identity so that your external actions no longer contradict your beliefs. The Harvard Business Review published findings on identity-based habits, showing that long-term change is most successful when people first shift how they see themselves. When you see yourself as someone who already is, you do what someone like that would do. You act in accordance with that role. The world doesn't just respond to your actions. It responds to your being. You are constantly broadcasting who you believe yourself to be through your tone, your posture, your energy, and your choices. So here is the structure I offer you today. In the morning, revisit the state of the fulfilled desire. Not with desperation, but with dignity. Ask yourself, if it were already true, how would I walk through this day? What kind of conversations would I have? What sort of decisions would feel natural? Then go and live one small piece of that answer. Maybe it's the way you sit in a chair, the way you greet the cashier, the way you speak to your reflection. Every act becomes a signal, a note in the symphony of becoming. And the beauty is, the more you practice this alignment, the less it feels like effort. Eventually, it becomes who you are, not just what you do. You wake up one morning and realize you've crossed an invisible line. The longing is gone. The waiting is over. Not because the external world has completely changed, but because you have. And the world, as it always does, rises to meet the version of you you've chosen to embody. So do not wait for proof. Be the proof. Do not ask for a sign. Become the sign. And trust that when you live from the end begins living through you. There comes a point in this process when you've assumed your desire, you've released it with grace, and you've begun to live from the end rather than striving toward it, and now you must do the final and often most delicate task of all. Trust the bridge. This is the invisible series of events, meetings, delays, opportunities, coincidences, and even setbacks that form the pathway from where you were to where you've already arrived in consciousness. It will not always look the way you imagined. In fact, the bridge often appears ordinary or even disruptive, but within it lies the perfect choreography of alignment. Philosophers throughout history have called this the unfolding, the Tao, the divine orchestration. In modern cognitive science, we might refer to it as emergent order patterns that rise out of seeming randomness. Your job is no longer to build the bridge brick by brick, but to walk across it with faith, especially when the next step is hidden by mist. To understand how this process works, consider the neuroscience of pattern recognition. The human brain is a meaning-making machine. According to Dr. Anil Seth, a professor of cognitive neuroscience at the University of Sussex, your brain is constantly predicting what will happen next and adjusting your perception accordingly. This process is called predictive processing. When you assume your desire is already fulfilled, your brain begins to seek confirmation of that assumption. But here's the paradox. In doing so, it often presents you with unfamiliar or unexpected paths that may not match your previous patterns. That discomfort, that unfamiliarity, is often the bridge itself. The very thing that feels like a detour may be the fastest road to alignment. You must become willing to see with fresh eyes and walk with a heart open to surprise. Let me offer you a simple metaphor. Imagine you're walking through the woods with a compass, not a map. The compass points you in the right direction, but you cannot see the whole trail. You must trust the forest, the wind, the sounds of the earth beneath your feet. Each step forward may feel uncertain, but you keep going because the inner alignment, the compass, remains steady. This is what it means to trust the bridge. And trust, in this sense, is not passive waiting. It is active cooperation with life. When your friend cancels a meeting, when your car won't start, when the doctor asks for a follow-up, you pause, you breathe, and you say, "This too may be part of the bridge." Not as a blind optimism, but as an open-minded philosophy grounded in personal agency and scientific insight. In fact, research on the phenomenon known as serendipity supports this view. A 2015 study published in the Journal of Positive Psychology found that people who held a mindset of openness and trust in the unfolding of life were significantly more likely to experience what they perceived as meaningful coincidences. These events weren't magical, they were the result of attunement. The more open your mental and emotional state, the more sensitive you become to opportunities that others miss. And perhaps most importantly, the more relaxed and present you are, the more clearly you can respond to what life is offering without panic, without resistance. Let me tell you a brief story. A retired engineer in North Carolina named Thomas had a dream to launch a local program teaching math to underprivileged kids. He visualized it daily, wrote the proposal, and sent it to several organizations. Weeks passed with no reply. One day, at the grocery store, He struck up a casual conversation with a woman in the produce aisle who turned out to be the head of a local nonprofit. She invited him to speak at her board meeting the following week. That encounter, which came after he had released control, became the bridge. He later told me that if he had been angry, if he had skipped the store or stayed in his head with worry, he might have missed it entirely. The bridge is always forming, but we must be awake enough to walk it. So how do we train ourselves to trust this mysterious path? The structure is as follows. Each morning, remind yourself of the state you've assumed. Then let the day unfold without grasping for signs. Replace the question, "Is it working?" with the affirmation, "I am on the bridge." When things don't go your way, ask yourself, "How could this be leading me closer?" Begin to interpret delay not as denial, but as design. When something unexpected happens, breathe and look again. Say yes more often. Be open to conversations, new people, new places. Your fulfillment may come dressed in unfamiliar clothing, but it will always carry the feeling you planted within. Let that be your compass. You are not required to know how everything will unfold. That is not your burden. Your task is to maintain the assumption, protect your inner state, and walk each day as someone who trusts the structure of life. Science may call it emergent complexity, mystics may call it divine order, but you know it as the subtle rhythm that begins when you stop interfering and start participating. The bridge is not a thing you build. It is a thing you discover one quiet step at a time. So move forward now, not with force, but with faith. Not with questions, but with quiet readiness. Your desire is not waiting for you. It is already reaching back, hidden in the ordinary, arriving through the bridge you dared to trust.